and welcome to another conversation in practical theology. My name is Saiyyidah Zaidi and I'm joined by Eric Stoddart. And today we are going to be looking at the subject of competitiveness in faith, in religion, and competitiveness just generally, I suppose, and how it impacts our lives. And when we were looking at this as a subject to bring into these conversations, I thought that this is really, really pertinent to where we are in the world today. Because despite aspirations not to be competitive, for example, at school, actually the world as a whole is becoming even more competitive. And so this opens up the conversation for us from a number of different angles, and it's going to be quite interesting to see the route that we take today.
Yeah, let me start by asking you, what do you mean when you use the term competitiveness? I'll explain mine in a minute, but what do you mean?
So for me, competitiveness is a useful term, but it's also very loaded. And so as a Muslim, one of the things that we are kind of encouraged to do is to compete in good deeds. And I think that that's a really good kind of aspiration for people of faith, people of no faith, because you're aspiring to help humanity, to help your fellow human beings, the animals that are around you. You know, you're competing in good deeds, and you're competing in terms of integrity and values. What is not so good when it comes to competitiveness is, for example, when we compete for money or for property or for, you know, promotions and for things like that. And I think that that can be very, very destructive. And an example of that is the concept from the prophetic saying, where we are kind of told that if a human being has one kind of mountain of gold, they're going to be searching for the next one. And I think that whilst that was something that was said, you know, 1400 plus years ago, it still is very, very valid today, because we see, you know, people who are incredibly successful externally, that they're still chasing and chasing and chasing, and there may be other aspects of their life that are kind of really falling apart. So for me, it's really about striking the balance between what it is that you want to do, what you want to achieve in life. And I think if I was to talk about my own competitiveness, I would say I'm always striving to kind of compete with the best version of myself, whatever that might be.
Okay, so I get the comparison with myself, that I can compete with myself, that I can get. The acquisition, the story about the one person with a mountain of gold and wanting another, that to me sounds more like greed than competitiveness.
I agree with you, but I also think that, you know, when you see your, when one sees a colleague at work getting a promotion, it may be something that you've never thought of, but because someone else is getting it, and then they're having a higher salary and all of the other trappings of success that come with that, all of a sudden you're thinking, well, why wasn't that me? And so there is a very fine line, I think, between positive competitiveness and competitive, yeah, which quite rightly, as you point out, leads to things like greed. And I think it really comes down to the individual and what their values are and what they will do as a result of that promotion or as a result of that other valley of gold, for example.
Yeah, I suppose not being remotely sporty, I think I can still indulge a sporting metaphor. And there's something about competing for me alongside someone else is about being spurred on to do better, because I want to keep up with them, I want to overtake them. Okay, only one of us can win, and that's where it begins to get a bit difficult for me in terms of that wrong type of competitiveness. But if somebody else is running a bit harder and I'm running a bit harder to keep up, that sometimes can be healthy.
It can, and I think you raised quite an interesting point, because the competition that comes out of sport, for example, if it's about you pushing yourself a little bit more, and you're doing it, and one is doing it in a way where they're not doing it to the detriment of somebody else or something else, then I think that's kind of perfectly healthy, because there are competitions, I think, in which everyone can win. And so, for example, the aspiration to do good deeds, well, if we all do one more, if somebody's done 10 and I've only done 8, for example, we've still all won, because everyone's kind of like lifting up their level.
See, I like that type of competition. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember at school when you still had prizes for actual winning, and it wasn't a mantra that doing your best was enough. Winning was the important thing. And I know later, that changed into, it's important that everyone does their bit, and there was a more equalizing. But certainly when I was at school, it was the winning was the thing. There was one winner and there was one prize. And that, I think, so taints competition.
Yeah, and I think that still is the case, to be honest. I think, this whole kind of agenda shift that tried to take place, where it's all about participation and things, I think to some degree that's backfired, because, I kind of see it with young people today, where there is an expectation of them getting something, even though they may not have put in the effort, because they've taken part, they've not put in the best of themselves, and they still are expecting the participation medal. And I think that there is only value in that when someone puts effort in. If you think just turning up is going to get you some sort of medal, then that can actually be quite destructive, because what are we then teaching young people before they go into the workplace? And what kind of values are they then taking into the workplace? And here, look, even if they're working for themselves, however they're spending their time, they're then thinking just showing up is enough, and it's not. And so I think kind of the concept of the medals, whilst that is somewhat destructive, and I don't necessarily like the idea of, there only being one winner, if we think about participation as a team sport, let's say, then you can gain quite a lot from that. And, the team spirit and the support, there's a lot of benefits that can happen in competition in that way. And I mean, it's, like, if I look at the English football team, for example, they have grown my respect for them has grown very, very considerably in the last few years under the stewardship of Gareth Southgate. Not because they're winning, but because of the way that he has created a team, and a team who has resilience, and they're supporting each other, and they're approaching things from a very, very different way. So even when they lose, there's some kind of sportsmanship in their loss, as opposed to kind of, taking their shirts off and throwing them in the floor in frustration. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you're onto something about, it's almost the converse of winning. How well do you lose? Because if it's only ever about winning, then exactly the description you're giving of the English team, who are able to lose with integrity, with team spirit, with respect for their opponents, that's a strong quality, to be able to lose, not just with dignity, but with appreciation of your opponents. And that gets lost in the hyper-competitiveness thing. I wonder how that translates into spirituality, because I was really intrigued when you talked about you're competing to do good deeds. And, there are verses in the New Testament about spurring each other on in the Christian community to good deeds. But, again, going back a number of years when I was much younger in Christian circles, there was a sort of unhealthy competitiveness in spirituality. You know, if you hadn't kept up with the daily readings, booklet, and the thoughts and meditations that went with it, you were sort of looked down on. If you couldn't claim to have prayed for a certain amount of time every day, you were looked down on. And I felt really uncomfortable about that.
And isn't it interesting that literally Ramadan has just finished, and what you've described is how so many Muslims kind of participate. And I think there is a healthy competitiveness when it comes to practice of religion and about, you know, doing the good deeds and things. But at the end of the day, I think one cannot compare a mum who's got 3 kids under 5 and a whole family to manage when her husband goes out to work, and, you know, and cannot expect her to fast and do all of her prayers and do everything else at the same level, let's say, as a single guy in his early 20s who's going to work and then has literally everything done for him. And, you know, he can even go out and buy all of his meals if he wishes. He can rock up to the masjid whenever he wants to. And it's a very different kind of thing. So I think we cannot compare circumstances and then say, well, everybody should be at the same kind of level in terms of the amounts of minutes that they're spending praying, the amount of Quran that they're reading, etc. Because you've got to look at that individual circumstance. And if, for example, this, and I am using stereotypes here, you know, just to kind of like really push the point a little bit. But if you look at that mum with the 3 kids under 5, if all she manages to do is fast and do her minimum prayers and read a couple of pages of Quran, I think, given her circumstances, she's done a pretty good deal. And yet if that other single guy who's got no responsibilities is doing exactly the same as her, then really he's not competing with his best self. Whereas we've got this other woman who's struggling to keep up with her best self and perhaps then sacrificing a little bit of herself. And that's why one of the things I always advocate is that I think all of our religions teach us about balance, and they teach us to be kind to ourselves. So approach worship from that perspective and don't think that you need to be a martyr in any of this. And I think as we learn more about our religion, then we learn about the kind of failures is too strong a word, but we learn about the things that we as practitioners of this faith are doing wrong. And that's where I think a lot of benefit can come from.
I like when you talk about being kind to ourselves, because there's something that balances up the competitiveness. And certainly in a social media world where you can now get apps that will help you keep track of your Christian spirituality in terms of Bible reading, in terms of prayer. Some of those apps, you can share that data with friends, just like Strava and cycling or running. You can do something of an equivalent with some spirituality apps. And that to me just makes me very uncomfortable. That it's not just setting a higher bar for spiritual development. There is something unhealthily competitive in a social media environment in terms of spirituality and comparing ourselves with other people, even if we're using it as a stimulus to do better.
I think, I mean, I agree with you, but I also think that for some people, they need that motivation. And so I look back to when I was a teenager and I knew that I wasn't praying 5 times a day. So what did I do? I kind of thought, okay, I need to solve this. And I made myself a little chart and a checklist. And every time I would pray, I would tick one off. Now that was just for me. And it made me then able to measure myself. And yet, if I had to share that with somebody, I probably would have felt very uncomfortable because, number one, I'm actually then having to do some form of a public declaration about the fact that my faith isn't where I want it to be. And then I probably wouldn't have done it. So it's a very kind of fine balance between these apps existing to support people, and they're kind of being detrimental. And so, I mean, even today when I'm kind of like doing my running and cycling and other things, I know apps like Strava exist. You know, my husband has them, lots of members of my, you know, family have them, friends have them. I don't use it because I don't want to share this stuff with other people, because actually it then means that I will do less.
Yeah, I get that entirely. I have a friend who does a lot of cycling, and sometimes on my social media timeline, I get things, you know, I've just been out for a 60-mile cycle. You know, goodness, you know, to me, that's why God invented cars. It's that sort of distance. The thought of cycling 60 miles just makes me sort of keel over at the thought. But so it doesn't incentivize me, but I can appreciate that there's something here about accountability and competitiveness and how those work together, and how spirituality, making ourselves accountable, but without that being competitive and prideful, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it is very, very hard, but I know for me, when it comes to accountability, so I'll give you an example, and you're going to laugh from what I'm about to say, because I'm training to do the Prudential 100, which is a 100-mile cycle ride around London. I know, but I've been trying to do this training for the last 6 months, and obstacles have just got in the way. And then I thought, okay, in Ramadan, I'll do something. I didn't do very much. So I've now got 8 weeks. And so I said to my husband, here is my training plan. Here is my nutrition and diet regime. I'm not doing it. I'm asking you to now make sure that I am on it with this, because if I manage myself, I know that I'm going to fail. But if I hand this responsibility to you and you can act as my coach, then I'm more likely to do it. And so on Sunday morning, he woke me up at 5 a.m. and we went for a cycle ride. And I mean, I really needed to push myself to go. But it was easier because I'd handed that responsibility to somebody else to coach me and to push me. And I think it's easier to do something like this when it comes to our physical fitness. I think it takes more courage to do something like this over our spiritual fitness.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because does it tell us what we consider to be most important? Because if we are willing to invest that in spiritual disciplines, or if we were willing to invest it in cycling or running or whatever it is, it exposes our priorities, and that for me would be quite uncomfortable.
I think what's interesting about that is that for me, it's not about my physical fitness being a priority over my spiritual fitness. It's just I feel more able to be vulnerable over my physical fitness than I am over my spiritual fitness.
Ah, right. So accountability, competitiveness, and vulnerability now are all part of that agenda. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean, though? Because it's easier to go to somebody and say, look, I'm this age, I'm not as physically fit as I want to be. I want to be healthy in my old age. Can you help me? That's much easier than saying, I don't know what position I'm going to be in when I meet my maker.
Yeah, goodness, that puts it into stark terms. And I wonder if that's really a more recent thing, since health and exercise and organized regimes like that have become more sort of popular. That sort of crept up. I don't remember it always being like that. That was a more specialist sort of thing.
I think it's because people were just doing general activities that kept them fit. So, you know, exercise would come through work, and they didn't have, you know, tomatoes 24 or, you know, 12 months of the year. Things just weren't around in the way that they are today. And so with this level of wealth that we have and abundance in all things, we need to approach it from a different way. Maybe it's too simplistic, I don't know. But I think the conversation around spiritual health is, it requires people to kind of go to a place that makes them more uncomfortable. And for me, I know that looking after my, or the vessel that God has given to me for my spirit, is also a form of worship. And so if I can look after my body and, you know, treat it much better, then I am actually doing an act of worship. And I think some of these things, they do come down to intention. And so, for example, as a Muslim, one of the most important things you can do is focus in on your intention, and that applies for everything you do. So those two scenarios that I shared earlier about, you know, the woman with the 3 young kids and the guy going to work, actually, if they both had their intentions to be that however they spend their day was an act of worship, they probably would even be rewarded for that.
Yeah, you see, that intentions thing that's really quite uncomfortable, because that's even if we're just asking it of ourselves, that's a really deep question about why are we doing something. And, you know, I'm thinking, you know, what one of my incentives for losing weight and even just walking as an exercise is that I've been asked to be in a wedding, a wedding party in September, and it's I want to lose a big tummy because I'm going to be standing up in public, and it's not the best of motives, to be honest, for that sort of incentive. And I'm sure I could find more spiritual and maybe honourable motives, but just pride about my physical appearance, maybe that's the best that I can do at the moment. I don't know.
But, you know, for me, I would say that's fine. Because the thing is that not everybody, and I'm, you know, we're having this conversation. I'm not like this all the time. I miss lots of reward because I don't have the right intention, you know. But I think it's fine, because as long as you're doing something in, one could say, in the service of God, or you're doing it so that people perceive you as a, I don't know how, you know, if one is perceived as an honourable representative of their faith, and then I think that's all a good thing. And if, for example, I'm making a cup of coffee and I know that I'm just going to really enjoy that, but there's no connection between me making it and drinking it and my intention, then I'm the one that's missing out on the reward there, you know. And for me, I would just work about how I can shift it, because it is possible to shift the intention. And I don't know if there is anything actually in your faith about even having an intention, then you're rewarded for that. Because in Islam, it's incredibly clear that if you have an intention for something, you get a reward. If you then go ahead and do that thing, you get another reward. And if you have an intention to do a bad thing and you don't do it, you still get a reward because you haven't done that bad thing. So for me, it's spelled out very, very clearly.
I think it's quite different in Christianity, and there's been a lot of debate in Christianity over the centuries about the place of rewards. And some will see God rewarding people very much in an Old Testament style, and they'll see that today in others will think in terms of a reward in heaven. And so it does get, it's controversial in Christianity. But there's a sort of monastic tradition about doing everything for the glory of God, which is maybe this language of intention that you're using, where someone who's in a monastery who's sweeping the floor, doing it for God with that intention, whether or not it's a reward, it's part of their worship.
Yes, yeah. And I think it's funny because, you know, yesterday we were out and there were just lots of plastic bags on the floor. So I said to my son, why don't we just pick them up? And he said, why? You know, because he's a 13-year-old boy, and 13-year-old boys don't pick up trash from the street. And I said, just do it because it's a good thing to do, you know. And it's about trying to help, I think, and try and make the world a better place.
Yeah, because it comes down to some of those very simple things, you know, as the example you give there, that sometimes spirituality seems to get inflated into huge, big issues, but actually often it's about the small things. That's where the difference really happens.
Yeah, and I went to a kind of little event last week where we were talking about the environment, and one of the things that really struck me was I always take around a kind of a coffee cup that I can wash, and I'll use it 3 or 4 times in a day, and then I'll wash it at night. And it sounds gross, but it works for me. And I was thinking, when we use mugs, so if you go to a place and you use a mug, the water that is used to wash that mug is costing the environment something. And when I had that thought, it was just as if a penny had dropped, because I think I'm being good, not using disposable cups. But if I'm using mugs and they require lots of washing, and I use 4 or 5 in a day, then how good am I being? So I thought I can justify my using my kind of, refill cup several times before washing it, even though I know it sounds not very pleasant when I say it out loud. But I can say that I'm doing that because I want to try and save the use of water and all of the production that goes into that. And if my intention for doing that is to somehow do something better for the planet, it's a tiny little thing, but for me, that is something I'm doing because I'm competing for those good deeds.
Right, I understand that, and I'm really intrigued with this notion of intention, because it really does seem to pin our attention onto what we're doing.
Yes.
I'm not sure if it's what would be otherwise called mindfulness or attentiveness, but that stopping to think seems to be really so crucial. Not necessarily about big things, but about small things. And it sounds like that becomes an interior, I don't mean just a habit, but it is a habit.
It certainly is. I mean, it's taken me decades to get to the point where I'm able to do this, and I know I'm still working on it. And for me, it certainly isn't mindfulness, because mindfulness in some ways is about taking the time to just stop and reflect and think. And when I do that, I do it as an exercise of peace, as opposed to one where I'm really thinking about what is the purpose of something that I'm doing. But I think for me, the reason why I think intention is so significant for me is because it helps me then think, what is the purpose of that thing that I'm doing? And it then helps to kind of, yes, it helps me to link my actions and what I'm doing with my faith at a very foundational level, but it also helps me to then think, well, how do I want to show up in the world? And what impression am I giving to other people about Islam and about me as a Muslim? Because this, I think I would say Islam as a faith is a perfect faith. It's just the Muslims that are messed up, right? Because we don't really know how to practice effectively. We've kind of lost our connection with a lot of the core tenets of the religion, and so we've ended up in this mess because we've confused culture with faith, and millions of other different things have come in. Now, if I go into my life as a human being, being intentional, being competitive, being all of these other things, and I think at the end of the day, I just want to try and be a good person in the service of God, and that's going to be that thing that guides me, then the intention of that is a good thing. And I think I suspect that a lot of people of faith probably are trying to do something similar, which is to be in the service of God.
In very practical terms, how is that communicated to you by your faith community? In Christianity, we might have self-help books in terms of spirituality, or we might have sermons, but more likely it would come through sort of small groups motivating each other. How practically do you learn that as a Muslim?
So there's the Friday sermons, there's lots of talks that are available. And so, for example, in Ramadan, there's loads of really, really good stuff that comes out on self-development and how to be a better person and all of this. And so for me, I kind of think it's not just for Ramadan, it's for the rest of the time as well. So every now and then I'll listen to, a few minutes of a short talk or something. But I am also somewhat controversial in that I will quite openly listen to preachers of other faiths. I will listen to self-development from the secular world and things, because if whatever the content is, if it makes me a better Muslim and makes me closer to God, it doesn't matter the packaging that it comes in. So there is a huge amount that is out there for Muslims, and some of it is very, very helpful. Some of it I find quite challenging, which is why I kind of think you've got to find the thing that works for you, whether it's a book or an audio or a video, and from whatever source it comes from, as long as you're able to take it and use it in a way that is supporting you in your relationship with God, then I think it's all good. But I think there are people who are fragile in their faith, and I would encourage them to just go and get the right kind of support that they need from people that they trust and value, so that they're not kind of, dare I say, perhaps manipulated by some of these things, because not all of the content is good.
Do you think that this can become a problem? I'm thinking in the Christian tradition, there's been scrupulosity is the term that's been used traditionally to refer to people for whom every little decision has to be thought about, and they become oversensitive about their spiritual practice, oversensitive about examining their intentions and motivations. How do you see that as a potential problem, and how would you avoid that?
See, I would say I probably put myself in that category, because and I'll tell you why. Because I think the thing is that there is an opportunity for me to have 24 hours of my day as an act of worship, if I have the right intention towards it. So even doing this, even this conversation can be a form of worship if I have the right intention, right? And that's why, I'll always say a little prayer before I do it and things like that, and at the end I will somehow express some gratefulness or gratitude to God for enabling me to do it. I miss those things sometimes, and when I realize, like I am doing now, that I miss it occasionally, I get frustrated, right? Because I've missed out on an opportunity for reward. But my kind of ultimate aim is to have my 24 hours as an act of worship. That means that when I go to sleep, if I go to sleep with the intention of resting my mind and my body so that I can wake up the next day and be in the service of God, why not? Even going to the bathroom, and this is where it's really interesting, even going to the bathroom in the right way can be an act of worship. And that's something that, in fact, gosh, even having sex can be an act of worship when you approach it in the right way, And I think, for me, this is really, really interesting, because I want every second of my life to be intentional and to somehow be seen by God as something that I'm doing for God. There is a fine line between me saying what I'm saying and people falling into paranoia, where they think oh my God, I haven't done my ablutions properly. I didn't make my bed properly. I didn't go to sleep properly. I didn't do this properly. And then them using it in a way that actually kind of, it paralyzes them in their life. If you're in that situation, then I think you need some help, and that can be spiritual guidance, or it could be therapy or something. But if you're on the other side of that, and people may even say that I need therapy because of the way that I'm articulating it. But for me, I'm able to function, I'm able to do the things that I want to do, and I can live a good, productive life. And I'm doing it all in the competition of serving God. So it can't be, it's not always a bad thing, although I can see how it could be.
And the word balance has come up so often in our conversation. And it seems to be something about recognizing the need for intensity and intentionality and taking ourselves seriously and accountability, perhaps, but yet balancing it with we're human and this is how life has to be lived sometimes. And if we believe that God forgives, then maybe fundamentally that becomes a protection for us becoming over intense in spirituality. But we started off with competitiveness, and we've got into, well, maybe at least I've ended up with forgiveness. And I wonder if that's actually the other side of that coin.
Gosh, I don't know what the other side of the coin would be. I mean, I think if the forgiveness is about us being kind to ourselves, then I think that it's important. I actually don't know what the other side of the competitiveness could be. It's a good thing for me to reflect on. And I'd love to hear what other people think as well. So, if you've got a comment on this one, please do share below the video. I think it does, for me, it does come back to this whole thing about balance and about competing with that best version of you and doing it in a way that is not causing destruction to either yourself or to anybody or anything around you. And that is pretty good. But I think that this whole concept of forgiveness, competition, balance, it's a lifelong journey. And I think the majority of us are probably going to struggle throughout our lives to find a balance in these things because they are so nuanced.
Yeah, and I think you've summed it up beautifully. And maybe without being competitive, I'll finish off this particular conversation. And to thank folks for listening and for viewing. If you'd like to leave some comments, please do so. And we'll be back for another conversation, Practical Theology, before not too long. Thanks for watching.